Hi, Stuart Bruce here, and I am the Spare Time Property Investor. In these podcasts, I'm going to share tips, tricks, and lessons that I've learned and will hopefully help you, especially if you're still working the 9 to 5. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Spare Time Property Investor. The sun is out, it's lovely and warm, and I am absolutely roasting. It's sitting in my office, so I'm going to keep this nice and short. Today, I interview Allan Harding, who is a really, really experienced property investor. He's somebody that I've kind of watched a little bit on Instagram and stuff like that, and seen all of these fantastic projects he's done. Probably the most experienced person I've spoken to on this podcast so far, so I was really excited to meet him and speak to him about property. So without wanting to waste any more time, here is the interview with Allan Harding. Oh, sorry, before we get into it, if you are a property investor who also holds down a day job, runs a business or something similar, and you want to come onto the podcast to talk about your experience, please get in touch with me on Instagram. If you search for Stuart the Bruce, you'll find me. There's also a link in the show notes. Just send me a direct message and I'll see whether or not it's something we can sort out. So thank you so much for joining me, Allan. I've been looking forward to this interview. But to start off with, if you could just tell me a little bit about your business. You're a company director of FX Technologies, I believe. So if you could tell me what your kind of day-to-day life looks like running that and how you fit property around that role.
Yeah, sure. So FX Technologies is an IT consultancy born out of, my background in IT, my background to deliver complex IT projects, to work with companies in the merger and acquisition space to integrate or divest departments and other companies that they buy around the world. So, it's an interesting one, but certainly sort of more than a full-time job in its own right.
Yeah, so you're managing that around. So you have different time zones. So I'm guessing you're going to have to be in meetings in the middle of the night to deal with some of those issues, and there's a lot going on there potentially.
Yeah, so I mean, the last couple of years have seen migrations and travel to, Australia all the way through to Canada, North America, Latin America as well. So it can be quite time consuming, as you say, especially winter's a tougher one because of the time zone. So Australia's further away and you're nearly 12 hours apart. So trying to have conference calls and meetings, It does very much end up it's either their night or your night. But then when you go from that and you've also got to deal with Latin America in the same day, it's difficult and sort of bolts onto both ends of your days when you're trying to fit everything in.
So then you've got these, bolting that on either end of your day, and then managing projects, property investment in the UK as well. So that must be really taxing in terms of managing your kind of energy and your kind of time and everything like that.
Yeah, it is. It's time consuming, it's energy consuming, and it is, it's getting it to a place where it can largely manage itself with minimal input, so that, I can focus on the business that brings in the majority of our cash, which, we pile back into our property projects. So, yeah, it's finding that balance somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so that kind of sounds like how you manage to fit the property investment around your business life then. So do you have people you rely on to kind of take on large chunks of that responsibility for the property investment?
Yeah, for some of it, I still like to be. I'm too much of a control freak to just hand it all over and let anybody else deal with it all. So
fair enough,
I do still get very heavily involved in what's going on and how we need to do it. I guess, it also depends on the project. So single lets, they're fairly easy. Once paperwork's done with the solicitor and the mortgage company, hand the keys over to the builder. The builder will be in there for a month. They know what I like. He'll send me photos. I can pick the phone up. Most of my single lets are within a 10-minute drive, so I'll go and visit them in the evenings or at weekends, see how they're coming on. And then it's a case of handing the keys to the letting agent for those and then, just letting them manage it. If you take something like one of our larger HMOs, we've done 2 big HMOs, or our new build project that's going on, it's been key to have somebody else that really wants to take that day-to-day project management element and deal with all the things like planning, like the council, like the neighbours when they object, and actually work day to day on those projects with me just being able to oversee them, look at other things in the background, so deal with the finance, deal with the solicitors, and sort of really take that step back and just focus on smoothing through the process in the background.
So with that, so you're saying you've got the potentially you've got the single lets and you've got the HMOs, and then this new build you were just saying about. Do they run at the same time, or are they one project after another?
So I used to do one after the other,
yeah.
But then more recently, you get a slippage on one, or you're waiting in planning, and planning can take longer than you think. So you have started the other. We've had a project in planning for about 18 months, just with some issues that have gone backwards and forwards.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, we've done a single let, we've done a 15-bed HMO, and we've started the new build project, and planning for that's nearly come through.
Okay.
So, yeah, if I'd sat and waited, I wouldn't have done anything for the last 2 years. But again, it's trying to work out what you can do alongside it. I didn't think I'd be looking at developing, 35 HMO rooms in 2 different parts of the country simultaneously. But yeah,
that sounds heavy. To be honest, that sounds really heavy.
Yeah, the back end of last summer, it was taxing to say the least.
Yeah. So what are you working on at the moment? I mean, and has the coronavirus kind of been problematic for anything you're working on?
In the property space, we've got a care home that we're just waiting for planning to convert to a 16-bed HMO.
Yeah.
And our new build planning is due this week. So that's for 8 new builds on a site not far from care home as well. So it's been interesting. So I think initially, all the funders suddenly went, no, we're not going to touch it, and panicked and started withdrawing funding just across the board for a lot of things. But that eased off very quickly. I think there's 2 elements. The councils have obviously had people working from home, so planning processes have been slowed down. And although the council still have their statutory obligations to meet of the timescales for those planning challenges, it is taking longer. But then on the flip side, we don't seem to be getting as much response from the public to our planning applications. So they almost seem to be running a bit smoother. So it's that balance of, I think there's wins in some areas, but it's just drawing the process out and taking a bit longer than it should do.
I'm surprised by that anyway. I'd have thought people would be at home, being very active in terms of any objections they might have to, things happening in their local areas. That's a really nice, a nice balance for you, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Seems to have gone that way. I was surprised.
Yeah. I have to ask you about the Grade 2 listed building I've seen on Instagram. It's really an amazing project. And as we said before we started the interview, I've looked at the images online, and it looks fantastic. I mean, that must have been something that was almost like I hate the term in a way, but a passion project. Something you would be very kind of happy with, aside from the kind of financial benefit of it. But it must have been like something quite exciting to get your teeth into. But I mean, how was it taking on something like that as an HMO, and the challenges of getting planning and dealing with the added complexities of it being a Grade 2 listed building?
Yeah, so to wind back, when I bought the building, it came with planning for a HMO. Somebody else had gone to a lot of the effort, and then walked away from buying it from the people that were actually selling it when I bought it. They'd been there for about 10 years, running it as a guest house, B&B type situation, and wanted to go and retire really. And there'd been somebody else spent nearly 18 months getting planning and going through the purchasing process and then pulled out. Mm-hmm. There were some challenges with the plans that they'd submitted. Although eventually approved, there was some contention between the listed buildings department, the HMO department, and planning. So before we even got down the road of actually buying the building, it was key to sort of get those 3 people together on site, wander around the building, and actually talk through how I wanted to manage it, the bits that they'd rejected before based on certain criteria that I wanted to then get added back into planning and things like that. So in one example, one of the bedrooms has, it's almost like a mezzanine, so it has an upstairs to it. Now, the staircase in that room wouldn't meet building regulations because it's not wide enough now. However, listed buildings wouldn't let us change the staircase because it was part of the listing.
Yeah.
So then, because you couldn't meet building regulations, the HMO officer was like, then you can't use it as a space. You have to lock it off and, not use it.
Lose it, basically.
So having them all out together and talking to them and going through this process, I was like, well, look, there's another cupboard over here. We could put a metal spiral staircase up into the next bit. Then we can just seal this piece off and we could work around it. And we gave them some ideas and had a really long conversation with them on site. And when they actually left, I think it's the next day or the day after, Kate, the HMO officer here, came back to me and said, right, we've had a discussion internally. As long as you extend all the fire safety equipment, so fire alarms, safety lighting up into that space, we'll more than happily let you use it, as long as there's no cooking equipment, as long as you don't, there's no sort of provision where the tenant would be more at risk of creating a fire. So it was really interesting. But again, had we just gone back and tried to resubmit planning, we'd have probably got the same no. And it's also very important to have that conversation.
And it's also interesting, the difference between speaking to people in isolation and getting them together, at the site and letting them see what your kind of thoughts are and plans are in terms of how you could progress the project.
Yeah, I was expecting more pushback on that. So it's a three-story building with a basement, ground floor and first floor, and then this fourth floor, if you like, in that one room. I was really amazed at the things that people like the listing department pick up on. So at some point there'd been a UPVC conservatory put around the back, which protected the entrance to the basement and a back door into the house. So you sort of had a porch. Bear in mind that had probably been there 10, 15 years. Their main concern was that it was UPVC, and even less concern than us using the space up in the building, we had to take the UPVC off and reclad it in wood.
Even though it'd been sat there for...
Yeah. And there's a separate, in the back garden away from the main building, there's a separate 4-bedroom house. Now, again, at some point in the 80s or 90s, it'd been fitted with UPVC windows. We had to take those out. Even though they're not in the part of the building that is on the listing, we had to take them out and put wooden windows back in.
That is crazy.
That's the craziness of the detail that we were getting into with them. I didn't realise how much they would specify, but when the architects drew up the specification for the builders based on what we talked about and how we wanted to go through the programme and what we needed to build and how we wanted to separate the building out, they went to the council and it went through the listed building department. They come back and they specify the type of plaster you're allowed to use, the type of paint you're allowed to use. And they are very specific in that process when you're going through it. The benefits of it, we ended up with a 15-bedroom HMO out of it. You probably, if you looked at what I class modern HMOs or a pub conversion, or even if you went by the government's minimum standards, you probably could have doubled the number of rooms that are in that building. Wow. But I think in some ways that's the beauty of a listing. You can't change that much. So we've ended up with 15 rooms. Everybody's got a large bed, they've got a wardrobe, they've got bedside tables, they've all got a sofa. They all have their own space that they can call theirs. So for me, it just made it stunning. They're 2.5 meter high ceilings, and it just gives it that real feeling of space. As you say in the photos on Instagram as well, you'll notice we've kept all the mouldings and the carvings around the ceiling, around the lights. It sells itself. We had somebody, unfortunately, who lost their work placement at the beginning of COVID and lockdown, so terminated their tenancy. And the first week people were allowed to move again under government guidelines, we had somebody take that room. And it is instant. People walk in and they just want those rooms.
I can imagine it, because I think more and more so people who are doing up HMOs are mindful of the design and making it look as good as possible. But if you've got a fantastic old house like that and you keep the cove and everything, it just looks brilliant. And like you're saying, the restrictions around what you can and can't do with it means that those rooms are, I'm sure, they're huge compared to what you would generally get in an HMO. So then you're appealing to people instantly appealing to people, because it must be such a great kind of product, for want of a better term.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got a friend who's got a single lets in the town, and I mean, he was amazed when I put, our biggest room out there, and put the rent on it. He was amazed at what I was asking for, and it was the first room that went.
Okay.
And it was the most expensive room in the building. It was the first room that was actually signed up to, and he was sort of saying he's getting a similar price for, if not less, for a 1-bedroom flat in the town.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
he was really surprised.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing, yeah. But like I say, it does look fantastic. It does look really, really fantastic, yeah. And I have to admit as well, it's nice to see. It's nice to see it when people kind of go the extra mile in a way, and not just doing very. I mean, it is an investment, obviously, but it's nice to see people doing something a little bit more than just bog standard, magnolia or white or whatever, churning out the kind of cookie cutter stuff. So it's nice to see. Nice to see that.
Yeah, I think there's an argument for cookie cutters in some of the towns, or if you're in the student areas, they'll be happy if it's all identical and it's the same. But I think if you take a building such as that, and there are other HMOs in the town around it, and I just look at them and I just wasn't keen, and we were like, we just want something so unique that people are going to walk in the door, down to the light fittings, that going and spending hours finding the right light fittings for the corridor, but then having them all match all the way up through the communal space, and just trying to get all those details and those finishing touches that, one, make it proud to be a listed building, but also, two, fit with the modern style of people wanting to live in a communal house.
Yeah, absolutely. So what originally sparked your interest in property investment?
So I've always thought about it in the back of my head, and I think from a very early age, when I started work I've been working since I was 15, 16, but when I sort of got into mainstream, what I call more mainstream full-time work at 18, I really looked at what I was getting paid, what the government were going to pay me when I retired, and really realised that it just wasn't going to suit my lifestyle even then. And if I wanted to be able to do something, if I wanted to be able to retire early, then I was seriously going to have to start looking at investment, how that worked, and just really getting an understanding of how much money I'd need to look for the future, and how I was going to make that. And in the early 2000s, one of the easiest ways, again at the time, not easiest, one of the better ways was property and long-term property investment.
Mm-hmm. So did you consider things like stocks and stuff at the same time and rule them out, or did you just kind of see something that made property like the obvious choice? Because in the early 2000s, you're saying it was maybe a popular thing to do. I'm not sure really.
Yeah, I mean, so probably, I think the thing that piqued me the most early 2000s when I started looking around, I was earning a decent wage, but house prices then were going up so rapidly that, I had a deposit, and 3 months later, I actually couldn't afford to get a mortgage on a house anymore.
Right.
So it was a really sort of interesting time where you were looking at it. You were, obviously at the time we didn't know, but you were heading towards the crash of 2007, 2008. But equally, it was the time when prices were just rising, and it looked a very attractive way to get in, make some money, keep moving up the ladder, be able to, afford to buy myself a bigger house all the time and keep moving up as well.
Yeah, of course. And did you do any training or have a mentor or anything like that as you were kind of starting out, or did you just kind of get going?
Yeah, not back then. So I got going. I bought my first house at the end of 2003, which actually is a house in France, which is one bit to consider. But just because it was way cheaper than buying a house here at the time. And then mid 2004, I actually moved out into my own house, which I'd got at the time. Again, really good deal, but it was a first time buyer deal because it was my first property in this country. The banks were offering 95% mortgages. The builders were paying a 5% deposit for a first-time buyer. So I paid a reservation fee of 500 quid, and that ultimately was it, because the builder paid my deposit and the bank gave me a 95% mortgage to top it up. So I didn't have to put a lot of money out
That's
there
crazy.
to get there.
That is crazy.
It was crazy. I mean, the same happens today with Help to Buy and things like that. It's just that the government are making that bit up rather than the bank, who then loses money. But yeah, so I stayed there for nearly 2 years, and then in 2006 moved out into a bigger house and decided to move on somewhere else, but always kept that first house and then rented it out from that point. So I've had that rental since 2006. To this day, it's still one of the best investments I've had. I mean, I paid about 114,000 for it back then. We had it valued recently, and one's just sold on the estate. It's a 2-bedroom coach house with garages below it, but one's just sold on the estate at just under 200,000.
Oh, okay.
So, the capital growth, even through 2007, 2008, and then to now, it's gone up quite significantly.
It sounds it, yeah, absolutely. And where do you have most of your investments locally? I think you did say about one being the other side of the country and stuff like that. But do you generally cluster your investments locally, or?
Yeah, so I've generally bought my single lets around where I live. And I wouldn't necessarily have done a HMO if it hadn't been the listed building and the size that it was when I wanted to do it. Smaller ones, I don't necessarily think always work around here. So the majority of my HMOs are Derby and Nottingham.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a good 3-hour drive from me.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And what made you kind of consider those as good locations to kind of buy in?
So largely the demand, but also the cost to get in at the bottom level to be able to buy a house, convert it to a HMO and get it rented. So the rents aren't largely dissimilar to some of the parts you were seeing down here. But if you take Swindon, which is a massive HMO town in Wiltshire, then you were paying 180 to 250 grand 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago for a 4-bedroom house you could convert to a 6-bed. And you go to Derby, Nottingham, I think the lowest we paid was 130, and the most we paid was about 154.
Okay.
So just the cost for entry, and they were 4-bedroom detached houses, integral garages, so they were still quite spacious, but really easy to get hold of and convert into HMOs.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, sounds good. Cool. So next we have 3 top tips for investing around your job. So any kind of tips you have for other people who are in the same position as you or have a job and invest in property.
Yeah, so it's always going to be challenging. So the first thing I would say is organisation. You have to organise yourself around your job if you're actually going to make it work. So, fitting your viewings in, dealing with trades, making it clear that if you've got a lunch break, you need to talk to your solicitor, to your mortgage broker, so that, if you need your job and you don't want to impact on it, then you need to make it clear how you're going to structure your day so that you can still get all of your stuff done and still deliver your job properly.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that organisation is always my number 1 tip. Number 2 is, it sounds corny, but networking and getting out to meet people that can help you. And that's key. I mean, I've got people now that will phone me up with properties, with deals, and it saves a lot of my time because I don't have to go searching for them.
Yeah.
And that's all through people I've met, people who have seen our work, people that understand what I'm trying to deliver by me telling them. They will then bring stuff that they think I'm interested in. Some of it's rubbish, some of it's not, key. It's not in our market, and it's not something that I'd look to consider. But there have been some gems, and the classic is the land for the new builds that we're buying came to me through somebody I know. They were walking past it, they saw it one day, phoned me up, asked if we wanted to go 50-50 on it, and we've paid 200,000 for a piece of land, so about 25,000 a plot, and for a new build that's pretty cheap considering they're all 4 or 5-bed houses.
Great.
It's pretty cheap. And probably the third thing is just learn Excel and track every penny that you need to spend and really organize your finances properly, because if you slip and don't get a handle on them properly, or you're not actually tracking your costs through a project, after a project your rent's coming in, it's all too easy for it to slip and for you to go over budget, or for you to miss rents coming in, especially if you've got a job and it's not your primary focus. So it's getting Excel or getting a system in place where you can actually just very quickly track that and see what's going on.
Absolutely, yeah. Great, okay. You're going back to the networking. So are we talking about people you just kind of meet and speak to, or do you network through events, or what? What's your kind of primary way to meet people in property and network and things like that?
Yeah, so variety of ways. Most of the people I work with are interested, so I talk to them about it quite a lot. I did host one of the Progressive Property Network events in Swindon for nearly 3 years, I think we did. So that was a great way to meet people and to get out, and especially if you want a very specific property focused event or people to go to. I've also been to for networking and BNI events as well. I tend to find some of the business events are a lot more structured and a lot better than sometimes the property ones. It depends what you're looking for. I've also signed up to a couple of things that interest me away from work and property, and quite an avid fan of sports cars. So I've been networking with a group of people who are sort of entrepreneurs that own sports cars more than anything, and their businesses range from owning gyms to owning cleaning companies, and that has actually been phenomenal. And it sounds really bad, but it's sort of a younger crowd around my age that are really interested in stuff. And when you start talking about property, you can see their eyes light up and them actually get excited, but they don't know where to start. And some of them, you know, they have money and they want to start looking at how they would do it. So that's also been quite an interesting
I can imagine
one.
actually, yeah, because they'll probably have in the back of their mind as something that sounds really interesting, but if you don't know the person who can kind of hold your hand into it, you know, it's great to kind of meet them. Yeah, I've seen your car. It's very nice. Your car does look very good. To be honest, I'm not a huge car fan, but that is quite nice.
So I know not everybody is, and I mean, it hasn't made an appearance on Instagram for a while, but it's it's nice to have something nice to drive around in.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So have you got any favourite business or property books that you've kind of go back to, or you found inspirational over the years, or?
So my favourite is Principles. Sorry, I was just seeing if it was on the shelf. Principles by Ray Dalio. He's one of my all-time favourite business books. If you haven't read it,
I haven't. I'm aware of him, but I haven't read that book.
It's an incredible book. It's the first chapter's pretty tough, I think, when you start it, but get into it or get it on Audible and listen to it, and when you understand how he nearly lost his hedge fund and then has turned it around and put systems in place to make it, you know, the largest private hedge fund in the world that's closed to new investment because they physically just can't deal with any more money. It's incredible. And the fact that he realized that he wasn't any good at being the CEO and put himself in a different role and got somebody else to run the company.
Oh, wow.
And that is just how they run it, and it's very open and very honest, and everybody in the company is allowed a say. I think it's a really, really interesting concept of how they set things up, and it is one I keep going back to. Just, you know, you've got to stick to these rules. You've got to stick through this. This is what you need to be doing.
That sounds good. He must have his ego well and truly in check, actually, if he kind of recognised that and stepped to, you know, and got somebody else to take that position. That must be something that. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the key things that they have is that, when they do feedback every year, it's in both directions, and people are allowed to give him direct feedback and tell him if he's making a mistake or if they think his idea isn't going to work, and then sort of have an explanation around why they're doing that.
Yeah, great. Cool. Okay. So next is if you've got any tools that you help to keep on top of things. I mean, you already mentioned Excel, but any other kind of tools or pieces of software that you use?
I mean, your diary is invaluable, and just making sure that everything is diarised that you're going to do, I tend to find really helps with productivity. I mean, I use, just because it's easier for me, I use Outlook, and I'll have it across the screen, and I'll plan everything in and get all my times in and work through that. But then obviously it syncs to my iPhone, it syncs to all my devices. Mm-hmm. My assistant can log in and she can see my calendar now, so that she knows exactly what I'm doing and where I am. And that that makes it a lot easier. Tenant management wise, for the stuff we manage ourselves, we're using GoTenant, which is pretty good. It's got everything bolted in, and that way all the documentation's electronic, so there's no paper floating around. There's none of this tenant saying they haven't had things, because they have to click a button to say they've accepted it. So they all have to sign up to say that it's all good. Outside of that, Xero for accounting I find pretty good, but it's the same as QuickBooks or something else that's out there. So yeah, I think it's understanding what KPIs you want to track and finding a system that's going to help you do that and manage that correctly.
Yeah. And I think having that business kind of background or foundation, that must be really helpful in terms of being aware of how the importance of having KPIs and keeping on top of everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I have, rather than me keep going and doing it all the time, I have my assistant export our profit and loss statements across the 4 companies on a Friday, and she'll email them to me. And at the end of the day on a Friday, I'll read it, and I'm looking very specifically at where the numbers are tracking, and if they're starting to drift, we can see that quite easily. And then it's a case of why are our metrics drifting? What are we missing that's not flowing correctly, and how can we bring it back online to get it to where we want it to be?
Great. So then you're saying your assistant does that across the 4 companies, you say. So your assistant helps you with your property and your business. They work across it all, do they?
Yeah, so she works across all the companies for me.
Okay.
She'll do bookkeeping. She'll respond to a lot of my emails now for me, and keep up to date and start helping manage those day-to-day things whilst I'm working and doing stuff. She can sort of take some of that back end stuff away from me and just save me a lot more time. Up until Christmas, I was doing it completely on my own, so I was still managing all the books, still trying to do everything myself. But you get to the point where Saturday morning was just a sheer paperwork morning, and trying to get your accounts done up and all done and getting everything sorted. So it was really key to start getting some of that out to somebody else so we could move forwards a little bit more.
Sounds it. It sounds like it's working well. So cool. Yeah. So we have 2 questions to finish up with. So first off, so this is more around property, although you could speak on the other side as well. If you lost everything, including your contacts, your network and everything, and had to start again from scratch, where would you start? What would you do first?
Wow, lost everything. I think again it would be about getting out and meeting other people in the property arena, and just starting to get to know people. I think anybody will tell you when you get into property, it's yes, it's a business, and yes, it's designed to make money, but from end to end, it's a property business. It's about who that's going to help you find a property, whether that's an estate agent, whether it's somebody else, whether it's a sourcer. It's who your mortgage broker is, who your solicitor is, if they're going to work in their best interest to get your paperwork and your applications delivered on time. And then, your letting agents, and then your tenants, and still being friendly with your tenants. Even if you've got a letting agent, all my tenants know they can come to me if there's a major issue, or, we always try to be very responsive to get things fixed if they raise issues and go down that line. So because it's people, I would always go back and start at building that contact list again from scratch before I did anything else. Yeah, great.
And then the last question is, if you could speak to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give them?
That's always an interesting one. Just buy more and buy it quicker, I think, on the property space. When I look back now, and I bought 2 houses pre-2006. I bought my main house at the time in the height just before the crash came, so I had like this knock-on effect. And if I could have gone back, really, I should have bought more in 2003, 2004. Just got them rented out rather than focusing on me moving up to a bigger house, I think. Just because it would be in a far better position now. But I think, don't get me wrong, I still totally enjoy everything I've done and the way I've done it. But yeah, I think if I went back, I'd be like, stop focusing on where you want to go and get your investments leveled first and then move up.
That's great. Yeah, that is a really good piece of advice, I think. Yeah, getting your investments straight first. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and having a chat with me. I'd love to catch up with you in maybe a year's time or something like that. But if other people would like to get in touch with you or see what you're up to, where's the easiest place for them to find you?
Yeah, so probably the easiest place is to follow my Instagram or send me a message on there, which is AllanH1, ALLANH1.
Great, cool. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Stuart.
Cheers. So there you have it, the interview with Allan Harding. I'm sure you can agree that he's doing some really cool stuff. I would really suggest that you go onto his Instagram actually. There's some really nice shots of that grade 2 listed project he was saying about. So that's it for this week, but before I go, I've got the weekly recommendation. So this week is 4,000 weeks. Now, I saw this recently advertised on Facebook or Instagram, I think, and it's all about getting rid of that procrastination that we all have, or maybe not all of us, but I do sometimes. It looks great. It's kind of a high quality poster with your expected lifespan sectioned up into weeks, and roughly that amounts to 4,000 weeks. And it really makes you appreciate, either how much time you've got left to enjoy life, or that you really need to get your shit together and get things moving. So that's my recommendation for this week. Maybe not for everyone, but I really like it. And hopefully it will help me achieve more. So thank you again for listening, and I will see you again next time. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please leave me a 5-star review to help other people find it, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.